Hello everybody. Let us discuss the life cycle of servlets. The life cycle of the servlet introduces the different things which are having the servlet instance with the web container that will maintain the life cycle. It has the following points that firstly we have to servlet class is loaded. The servlet class will be loaded into the memory. Then second thing, that servlet instance will be get created. Later on, in the third point, that the init method is invoked or it will be get called. The fourth point, the fourth step is the service method will be invoked, that is the service method will be get called. And at the last, the fifth point or fifth life cycle step is the destroy method will be invoked. That is, the destroy method will be get called. As in the right hand side, the diagram shows these three states of the servlet, that is the new servlet, the ready servlet, and the end. The servlet is in the new state if the servlet instance is get created. So in the above life cycle, the second point which will create the servlet instance. After invoking the init method, the servlet comes in the ready state. So the servlet will get ready after the init method. In this ready state, the servlet performs all the number of tasks which are assigned to the servlet. Maybe the calculation, maybe the application holder, the maybe application development, and the things which are related to the manipulation and calculation will be get performed in the ready state. And when the web container will invoke the destroy method at the last, that will ship the end state. So that is the life cycle of the servlet. Now, the servlet life cycle can be defined as the entire process of its creation till the destruction of servlet. The following are the paths followed by the servlet. The first, the servlet is initialized by the calling the method, that is init. The servlet secondly calls service method to process the client's request. The third life cycle point that will get cleared, and it will be get terminated by calling the destroy method. At the last, finally the servlet is garbage collected by the garbage collector of the Java virtual machine. So all the things will be happened with the Java virtual machine. The servlet lifecycle calls three important methods which are called as the init method, second service method, and thirdly destroy method. Those all methods will be defined in the entire process of the creation of servlet and up to the destruction of the servlet. The first is a init method. The init method will be called only once. So it is called only when the servlet is created and not called for any user's request afterwards. So it is used for one-time initialization, just as with the init method of applets. The servlet is particularly created when the user first invokes the URL, that is uniform resource locator, corresponding to the servlet, that is the website address corresponding to that servlet, but it can also specify that the servlet will be get loaded when the server is firstly started. The init method will be called only once with the server, and it will be first called at the first time that will be get initialized for the applets. Now, when a user invokes a servlet, a single instance of each servlet gets created with each user request, resulting in the new thread that is handed off to do get and do post, which is the appropriate method. The init method, which will simply create or load some data that will be used throughout the life of the servlet. So normally the init method that will create and loads some sort of a data, but it will be one time initialized, and that will be the request when the servlet is created. It will not be called later on also. So it will be created when the user firstly invokes the web address of the servlet. Now, the definition of the init method looks like the following. That is public void init, that is the definition of this method init, that will throw servlet exception. So in between the curly braces, the initialization code of init method will be get created. The next method is a service method. The service method is a main method to perform the actual task. Whatever the actual task may be, the calculation, manipulation in the servlet, that will be done in the service method. The servlet container, that is the web server, which will call the service method to handle all the requests which are coming from the client browser, that will be written to the formatted response back to the client. So whatever the request from the client browser will come to the server, that service method will perform the actual tasks, actual calculation in the server, and the response, what will be the response, it will be get created and the response will be sent to the client browser. Each time the server receives a request for the servlet, and the server spawns a new thread and calls the service. The service method checks the HTTP request type, that is the GET, POST, PUT or DELETE, and calls the doGET, doPost, doPut, doDelete like methods, whichever the appropriate method will be used in the service method. Here is some sort of a signature of this method, that is public void service in bracket servlet request servlet response will be response, that will throw the servlet exception and IO expression, comma IO exception. The servlet code will be written inside the process. Now this service method is called by the container, and the service method which will be invoked doGET, doPost, doPut and doDelete like etc. methods, whichever the appropriate for the service method. So we have to do nothing with the service method, but we have to override either doGET or doPost depending on what type of request you will receive from the client. Now the client which is requesting something to the server, that will be done, the actual performing task will be done in the service method, and the doGET, doPost, doPut, those methods will be used, whichever the appropriate method that will be most frequently used. Mostly the doGET and doPost, which are the frequently used method in each service request. Here are these two methods. That is, the first is the do-get method. The GET request, we know that about the GET and POST. So the GET request results from the normal request for the URL or from an HTML form that has no method specified, and it should be handled by the do-get method. Now this is the particularly the syntax of do-get method, where do-get is written public void do-get in bracket http servlet request variable and http response, the response arguments which are shown, and it will throw the servlet exception or IO exception with the comma, and whatever the servlet code will be inserted inside this curly braces. That is the do-get method. The next method is a do-post method, which will require to use with the post request, and it will result from the HTML form that specifically lists post as a method, and it should be handled by do-post method. The do-post method has the following syntax, that is the public void do post having http servlet request and http servlet response the arguments that will throws servlet exceptions comma IO exception, and whatever the servlet code will be inserted inside the curly braces. So that will show the do get and do post methods. Now, also very important method that can be used in the application where the servlet processes are done with our application. At the time of creation of the servlet, there will be need of destroying that servlet. So the destroy method is called only once at the end of the life cycle of the servlet. Now this method that will give you servlet to chance to close the database connection, halt the background threads, write the cookies list, or hit counters to the disk, that will be perform other such cleanup activities. So at the time of using the application's runtime, the destroy method will be called at least once, where those things, those tasks will be performed, that is closing of the database, halt the background threads, or you can say the cookie list writing, or you can hit the counts disk, performing some sort of cleanup activities. After the destroy method is called, the servlet object is marked for the garbage collection, and that will be get destroyed. The destroy method looks like the following, that is shown here: public void destroy parenthesis, in the parenthesis you can give the arguments, and the finalization code will be given in the process. Whatever the destroy method will do, that will be temporarily created servlets will be get destroyed, and whatever the requests from the client that will be served from the server by using the servlet, at the last by using the URL you can destroy the servlet. Here the architectural diagram of servlet lifecycle is shown here, where each step gives the handling of lifecycle of servlet. First, the HTTP requests which will coming from to the server, which are delegated to the servlet container. So these web server, whatever the requests will be coming to the server which are delegated to the servlet container. Now these requests to the servlet container is passed. The servlet container which will load the servlet before invoking the service method. before invoking the service method, this servlet container loads this servlet. Then the servlet container, handles multiple requests by spawning multiple threads, each thread executing the service method of the single instance of the servlet. Now, the Java virtual machine is comprising the servlet container as well as servlet. Those threads, thread A, thread B, and thread C, which are tending towards the service method, where the servlet is initialized and the service method will do all the different tasks which are assigned to service method. At the last, the destroy method will be invoked, and there the servlet will get destroyed. Thank you very much for watching this video.